Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could teach the gullible to never be so comfortable with eyes they eat like comfort food, to disregard the bogus claims and pseudoscientific claims? Can you imagine just how much indeed the world would change? No more political predators playing on the populace, but ilkas and plots to shift and kill metropolis. No more villains with the title in the Bible, holding phony temper Bibles like the stuff they teach is vital. Imagine it was normal to have to prove a claim you make, and folks really feel ashamed expressing content that was fake. It's not to say we never make mistakes, it's just to say we go out of our way to show the evidence it takes. Remain skeptical while you travel the road.
Hey, I'm Rob Penzak.
And I'm Larry Mendoza.
Welcome to Road to Reason, a skeptic's guide to the 21st century. We have a fabulous show for you today. We're going to be joined by Darrel in about 15 minutes, founder of Recovering from Religion, author of The God Virus and Sex and God. First, we've got a few news stories that we want to talk about, and then we're going to ask Darrel to lend his point of view on some of those also. So we're going to start with something a little bit silly. The Boy Who Came Back from Heaven. This was a best-selling book, but it turns out that the boy didn't actually die, didn't actually go to heaven, didn't actually see all those things. And when the publisher heard that it wasn't real, they then decided to recall it. What do you...
So, I mean, what a surprise there. He didn't actually go to heaven. I'm not sure why the publisher decided that that was a true story and then all of a sudden take the books off the shelves. I guess it made him look bad.
Right, I mean, the level of skeptical thinking that must have went into that editorial decision in the first place. Well, here's a bona fide thing. The kid actually went to heaven. We need to publish this. You know,
now,
it's just,
what 6-year-old kid, usually, that's the thing. They believe the 6-year-old kid, okay? The funny thing about this story is that the kid's last name is Malarkey. I thought that was a funny thing, but anyway, so the book is no longer available. So sorry,
anyway,
guys, if you thought that he actually did go to heaven.
Moving on from there, Winfield, Alabama, in a secret meeting, the city council with the mayor decided that it was time to cede that city over to God. We're not sure exactly how that works, but now it no longer belongs to the people. Is that any problem with church and state problems?
Well, yeah, if it does it, boy, you ever have a problem with church and state. But the question is, how is God now the mayor of this city? I mean, how does that really even work? So I guess they just decided that he is going to run the show. He's going to stop having meetings.
Yeah, it's unclear. I'm not sure if prayer is going to be allowed back into those meetings now that God owns the place. But again, this is another funny thing that happens behind closed doors. And that's our next story, Redefining Science. West Virginia had joined 25 other states a few years ago in developing a new set of standards for teaching science in the United States. It turns out that behind closed doors, once again, right before things are going to come due, they decided to water things down in terms of climate science. Just like with evolution, they want to teach the controversy. With cigarettes for years, they wanted to teach that maybe it wasn't really the cigarettes causing cancer. So now we have this again behind closed doors. Religion, is changing the rules.
What the scary thing is about this is that this is happening across the U.S. and you hear about these stories popping up here and there. But what's happening behind closed doors is what's really scary. And redefining science standards by interjecting religion in there is going to create a nation of scientifically illiterate people. Like, we already have this problem. And this is the scary thing, and this is happening. And so every time, that's why it's important for people, I think, in my opinion, to go to Board of Education meetings, to go and voice your opinions, because this is happening probably all over the place.
Right, and the local boards really do have so much power, and when money floods in, by affecting those boards, suddenly you're affecting the way a whole new generation is going to be educated, and you're right, all of us need to sort of be involved and try to know what's going on as best we're able to.
Even if you don't have kids in school, it's always a good idea to get involved in your local politics for this reason, to kind of catch them, hold their feet to their fire. When I lived in Loudoun County, we went to all the Board of Supervisors meetings. Well, we didn't go to all of them, but we went to a lot of them, because they were trying to pull some fast ones, especially with the Christmas nativity scenes and all this stuff. We were there trying to let them know we're watching.
Right, and transparency, this is why it's so important. And we've got this whole movement to get rid of regulation everywhere and just trust corporations behind closed doors, just trust the churches behind closed doors. As soon as the doors are closed, you should wonder, why do they want those doors closed? What are they hiding from us? And these are a couple good examples.
And these are examples, absolutely.
So, all right, now we're going to move on to a couple other more concerning things. Tell us about the Raif Badawi, the blogger in Saudi Arabia.
So Raif Badawi, I think it's pronounced Raif Badawi. If I mispronounced that, I apologize. But in 2012, he was sentenced to jail and to lashes for one of his crimes was insulting Islam through electronic channels. That was the official crime. And then he later also got indicted for apostasy. And he received a sentence of, I think it was 600 lashes and 7 years in prison, which then last year, or in 2013, it got resentenced to 1,000 lashes and 10 years in prison plus a fine. Now the lashes were supposed to have been given, obviously not all at one time. 1,000 lashes all at once is, so they decided
that would be cruel.
That would be cruel. So they decided to do it over the course of 20 weeks and 50 lashes a week. So the problem with that is the lashes, they wanted it to be severe. Essentially what these lashes do, it's a slow death sentence. And I think that's what they wanted, because apostasy in Saudi Arabia is punishable by death. This is on the books. So the scary thing
this is in our staunch ally Saudi Arabia that we might be able to maneuver with some.
Often those on the left that criticize me for discussing or criticizing Islam say, you can't paint Islam as a monolith, right? But the problem is, even what we would consider to be a moderate Muslim country like Saudi Arabia, they're doing this kind of barbarism for those who speak out against Islam. That's a scary thing. And this is something that we need to pay attention to, speak out against. I mean, that's just an example. We'll talk about Charlie Hebdo here in a minute, but these are examples that they want to silence free speech, and they want to silence any criticism. And unfortunately, the UN supports like blasphemy laws and things like this. Why should we silence our free speech because of the fear of what the Muslims do? I mean, it's unbelievable to me that we would be staunchest allies with a country that codifies this.
And how can we talk about our moral authority in the U.S. when we choose just to ignore things like this? Like, this guy's not going to help us get any oil fields, so
Yeah, exactly.
Whereas when it's convenient to say we're doing something, because it's the morally right thing to do, then we get involved. This is something that everybody should really be concerned about. This guy didn't commit any crimes at all, certainly not anything violent, and
he was a liberal blogger.
Right, he's going to be tortured to death unless something changes.
And the thing is, the 50 lashes a week, to mention, they lashed him the first time. His lashes were so severe that they had to postpone his second week of life because he still hasn't recovered. So you got to think 20 weeks of this. I mean, it's a slow death sentence. I mean, the man will not survive this.
Right. I think Rumsfeld and Cheney said that while they didn't say anything about this. I just think that we should remember that we lose a lot of moral authority when we start waterboarding and doing torture. It's hard to look at something like this and say, hey, these guys are reprehensible, because we were pretty reprehensible in ways too, and we should not let people doing that represent us in the government. Everybody needs to get involved, and if you disagree with what our leaders are doing, make it known.
Make it known. Speak out. I mean, that's what the foundation of this country is this idea that we can speak freely, and we should. Mm-hmm. And we cannot just, shut a blind eye to this. I mean, a lot of the news recently has been in Charlie Hebdo.
Right, let's move to our last news item. We're going to talk about that, freedom of speech. And so with Charlie Hebdo, can you just give a little overview of what that was about?
Well, Charlie Hebdo. I mean, I'm sure most people by now know Charlie Hebdo has become pretty much a household name in the last couple of weeks, but it's a satirical newspaper, and they satirized religion, Islam, Judaism, Christianity, all of it. It's not like they were just picking on Islam. That's what they do. It's a form of free speech to draw satirical cartoons of religious leaders, of religious
right, and when you mess with the religion of peace, how does that play out?
When you mess with the religions of peace, then it plays out with you dying, essentially, and getting murdered in cold blood. There were 5, I think, cartoonists and an editor of the newspaper got murdered in cold blood for satirizing Islam.
Right, and it should be pretty obvious how barbaric that is, and nobody's going to argue that. The thing that we want to focus on a little bit today, though, is some of the reactions to those cold-blooded murders were very much akin to, hey, you're mocking religion, you brought this upon yourself, and that came from none other than the Pope. And what do you do with when people are talking that way?
It's scary, and the Pope saying that you should not insult religion is basically siding on the side of censorship. Most people that I've talked to love this Pope. They think he's a wonderful Pope. I've always been critical of this Pope. I don't like any of the popes, but now he's showing his true colors. And That is correct. He wants to silence free speech because he doesn't think that religion should be above, or is he thinks that it should be above rules. Criticism. And it's malarkey, is what it is. Because if you cannot criticize an idea, then we might as well forget about free speech altogether. Mm-hmm. Because that's the essence of free speech, is to criticize ideas.
Right, and if you want to talk about, well, I'm sort of lost here. So you go, I lost my train of thought. I was going to say something on the Pope, but I lost it.
Well, I mean, the Pope, that's he's showing his true colors. I mean, very often the Pope has said a lot of things that liberals like to hear, I wonder where they are now, what liberals are thinking about him now. I mean, and every time the Pope says something positive or seemingly positive, like all atheists will go to heaven or can go to heaven, there's usually a clarification.
Yeah, it gets rolled back a few days later. There's a great article by Mohammed Saeed and Sarah Hayder from Ex-Muslims of North America talking about Charlie Hebdo and the liberal left, and it's in the Humanist. Everybody wants to get a chance to read that. I recommend that.
Absolutely, and that's part of the problem I have with the left is there are some who believe what the Pope believes. Well, and the right too. The right has been very critical of well, if you insult religion, then this is what you get. Well, no, that's unacceptable. It should be unacceptable. And the Muslims also, when the Charlie Hebdo attacks first happened, the Muslims, came out and condemned these attacks, which is a good step forward. But what the Muslims need to do, and the Muslim leaders need to do, is support unabashed free speech. Mm-hmm. They need to come out and support it. If they do not, they are being complicit in these acts, even though they, want to distance themselves from them. But this is something that's inherent within Islam. Even the most moderate Muslims support the blasphemy laws and things like that, and that's scary. That is scary.
So remember, what I wanted to say when you're talking about the Pope is that it's also not just the individual, it's the whole idea that you have somebody who's infallible, who's the voice of God, right, who you can't question. That's really the problem, that whole institutional elevation of a single person as if they've got some special knowledge that none of us can access.
Right, and it's funny because the Pope is supposed to be infallible according to the doctrine of the Vatican and the Catholic Church, but yet he says things that is, upsetting a lot of Catholics also, and so they're, how is this infallibility now? Why is it being challenged by these statements the Vatican puts out to clarify what the Pope is saying? Yeah. I always thought that was kind of funny, Yeah. But here's what the Pope really meant.
All right, so we're going to have a public service announcement in just a minute. First, you had one more bit of science news you want to throw in?
I want to throw this in here. This is really nothing to do with religion, but I thought it was, it's a science news. So the Washington Post was reporting that over 80% of Americans support mandatory labels on foods containing DNA, which is roughly the same amount, is roughly the same percentage of those who support labeling GMOs. All right, which that's a whole other issue in and of itself because I think it's just silly. But the Washington Post was making a little bit of a fun of this, and they said this is what the DNA label may look like, and I'll read it straight from the Washington Post. It says, warning. This product contains deoxyribonucleic acid, DNA. The Surgeon General has determined that DNA is linked to a variety of diseases in both animals and humans. In some configurations, it is a risk factor for cancer and heart disease, right? Pregnant women are at a very high risk of passing on DNA to their children. So this is what I guess a good label. I mean, this whole idea of labeling foods GMO and it's silly, and I guess that's what they're getting at is that DNA is DNA. We can manipulate DNA in many ways. Mm-hmm.
But the idea of labeling everything with DNA just speaks to our scientific illiteracy. Anything that's alive. I guess if you have an RNA virus, you won't have to label that, but most of the rest you're going to.
What about RNA? They don't talk about RNA, and most foods with DNA are going to have RNA. Actually, all foods with DNA are going to also have RNA.
All right.
Anyways, I thought that was cute.
So we're going to break away here. A quick word from Richard Dawkins, then we'll be right back with Darrel Ray.
This is Richard Dawkins. Doing commercials is unfamiliar territory for me, but I'm inviting you to watch Road to Reason, a skeptic's guide to the 21st century, on Fairfax Public Access every Sunday. Each week, the hosts tackle wishful thinking, religion, pseudoscience, and the harm they cause, with a combination of facts, humor, and community involvement. They challenge believers to defend their faith and give you, the skeptic, a voice. With live call-ins for viewers and streaming on the World Wide Web, there's never a dull moment. Don't wait. Look at them now on Facebook and YouTube. And remember to watch Road to Reason, A Skeptic's Guide to the 21st Century, or there'll be hell to pay.
Right, we are back now, joined by Darrel Ray. He's a psychologist, the founder of Recovering from Religion, also the author of this excellent book, The God Virus, which we're going to spend most of the time talking about today. Darrel, thank you for joining us. Hey, Darrel, can you hear us now?
I can hear you fine. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can now. So thank you for joining us. We thought we could maybe start by having you give us some perspective in terms of the metaphor of the God virus on some of those stories we touched on. First one was the boy who came back from heaven but actually didn't. How is it that a big publishing company fell for that, or what was behind their real decision to publish the book in the first place and then to take it back?
Well, I would say it speaks to their level of gullibility. I guess if you can believe there's an invisible friend in the sky, you can believe almost anything. What you see over and over again is how many of these stories, I don't just mean this kid, but so many of these stories, you go to a church and people are giving all sorts of crazy stories about their getting healed and stuff, and people just buy it. And they're actually taught and trained to believe this kind of stuff without critical thinking.
And I think that this gullibility is making publishers and the church a lot of money, I think.
Oh yeah, it sure does.
Do you believe in this case that it really is truly gullibility on the publishing house part, or is that looking past it for their financial interest, or is it really that they truly are so swept up by the God virus that they don't see what's obvious to the non-believers?
I think it's both. I mean, obviously the money's there, and when you got a lot of potential earnings for something like that, it's going to jade anybody's judgment, whether it's religion or not. That's a second part.
Right.
But no, I think these folks are clearly influenced by their own dogma, by their own ideology. That's pretty hard to get away from.
Yeah. Okay. Now we're going to hopefully get you on the screen. I can't tell if you're on. We can hear you fine. I don't see you at the moment.
No, I don't think you got me.
Yeah.
Okay. Second thing we talked about was Winfield, Alabama, ceding that town's ownership to God, and I thought that tied in beautifully to your book. How is it the God virus convinced, a mayor and council to give the town to God?
Well, actually, I have a whole section in the book that talks about the civil religion and about how religion's always trying to gain control of the reins of government. I mean, think about it. If you have to struggle to get your message out and fight against a lot of other religions, then that means you're spending a lot of time and resources in that area. But if you can get a hold of the reins of government, then government will, taxpayers, if you will help you get the word out. I mean, that's essentially what you've got in Saudi Arabia and in many other Islamic countries, is the government is enforcing the rules of religion. The religion doesn't have to pay any price. The taxpayers do it. Well, that's kind of what's going on here. That's why the Republican Party has been taken over by the religious right, because the religious right sees the value of having government doing the dirty work for it. And military, too. You know
what's funny is you mentioned that they want government to do all the work for them, but yet they're the ones that think government should stick out of their noses out of religious business. I think it's somewhat of a one-sided and hypocritical viewpoint that they have.
No, it's not hypocritical. It's practical.
Yeah.
It's very practical. It's been going on for 2,000 years.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you and I would see that as hypocritical. But if you look at it from the perspective of an organism trying to propagate itself, forget the label of hypocrisy. I really think it's useless to understand it in those terms. What it is, it's an organism, or what appears to act like an organism, what I call a God virus, trying to replicate itself. It really doesn't care how it does it. It wants to go the easiest way, and lo and behold, letting the taxpayers pay for the propagation, that's a lot cheaper than trying to do it yourself.
Yeah.
I mean, they've still got books. Hadn't been that long ago in Europe where everybody had to pay a tax to the church.
Right.
They still take taxes out in some countries. Right. Even to people who are atheists still have to pay taxes to the church. Well, that's a hell of a lot easier, and we could see that. Yeah. We see it when religious charter schools, for example, or religious schools get subsidies from the government. It's the government paying for the propagation of the God virus.
Absolutely, and I mean, we're seeing that more and more. It seems like we're moving in that direction, and it's kind of scary to me to see that. But one thing about Europe, by the way, is that they actually have state religions in most of European countries. They're official state religions.
Yes, and the nice thing is in places like Norway, Sweden, in some parts of Germany, they've eliminated the tax. So
good.
I have friends in Denmark who are virtually atheists, and I talked to them about the state tax, and they said, yeah, they take, I think, 7%. 7% out of there as a tax to the church, and the churches are all worried because nobody goes to church anymore. So who's going to pay maintenance of these churches? But you can just say, I want to opt out. The problem is in places like Denmark is they publish who opts out, so everybody will know that you're not paying your church tax. And so there's some peer pressure still going on, even in these non-religious places. Isn't that funny?
They need to set that up a little differently, where you can contribute to charitable causes but take out the religious part. And I've been reading different things, so I forgot if this was in your book, but of the money that you might, I think you did talk about, dedicate toward religion, how much of that actually goes to a useful product at the end, and how much gets swallowed up in between? Maybe you can talk about that.
Right. My analysis in the book is 95% of every dollar goes into a church, goes into propagating the virus. Only 5% goes to do anything of any value, like cure a disease or help a kid get an operation or feed somebody or dig a well.
Right.
Only 5 cents. That's horrible.
5 cents to every dollar.
Yeah, you are wasting most of the dollars you give to a church.
Right,
if you really want to help anybody.
You told the story about sort of some of the things that you did to try to keep a community center open and useful for the general public, and then when you had to leave, how it fell apart. Maybe you can give us a quick synopsis of that.
Yeah, I even trained my replacement. I was doing a bus ministry, and I was bringing kids into the church, and I had the gym open during that time. And so neighborhood kids were able to use a gymnasium that would not have been available to them, and I was supervising it. And I trained my replacement people, and the minute I left, the replacement person resigned. And what I found out later, that was all a plot on the part of the elders. They had planted him to be my assistant. They gave him the job of going and helping, lying to me basically, so that when I left, he could let it die and claim that he didn't have time or something. Yeah, so to my knowledge, that gymnasium, that was 1971. To my knowledge, that gymnasium has never again been open to the community. Wow. Now, why you got this beautiful church with this beautiful gymnasium and nobody can use it?
And nobody can use it, right?
Right, yeah.
Well, you make a point. You make a point that the God virus might be charitable, but only to those within the fold. It really is not concerned with the broader humanity. It's concerned with self-propagation.
Absolutely, right.
Well, everything the church does, essentially is designed. We'll feed you if you take this Bible with the food. That's just something that they've done for years and years and years. The missions in Africa, for example. I talk.
Will help with AIDS as long as you don't use condoms or other ungodly things.
Right, exactly.
It's crazy.
I talked to. There was a friend of mine who's. Her mother knew some people that were, would go to these missions in Africa, and they would find these what they would consider to be uncultured, godless, tribes, and they would try to eradicate their culture, their religious beliefs, in order to replace them with and that's the propagation. That's the virus at its best, infecting new hosts, right?
Absolutely, and unfortunately, the God virus and disease virus work very well together.
Absolutely, interestingly.
Can you talk about the last Pope, Benedict, when he was in Brazil? I think you talk about his how he made a speech about all the wonderful things that Christianity did and how it wasn't received so well. Why wasn't it received so well? What was the history? And what did the God virus do to get rid of his understanding of history?
Some of the people in the audience listening were some of his own priests, and they see what's the appalling behavior of the Catholic Church in eradicating the local cultures. And even the priests were protesting against Benedictine's statement that Christianity. What he said in his statement at that speech was that the Indian nations of Brazil were just waiting for the message of Christ to come to them through the Catholic Church, as if that was a benefit. What he didn't say was that 90% of you are going to die because we brought that message to you. either through the sword of the conquistadors or the diseases that they brought with them. And the local priests were really upset that he didn't acknowledge the terrible role that the Catholic Church played in that catastrophe, which was virtually genocide. Now, it was genocide assisted with disease, but both were a part of the whole process of proselytizing to the native tribes in the Amazon.
And can you talk about what the God virus, like obviously, Benedict wouldn't say something that he knew was going to make him look stupid on purpose. So what does the God virus do? How does it play into it to lead him to make such statements?
Well, every leader has to change the mythology. The mythology of the local, of the religion has to change in order to keep people infected. So he can't go up there and say, yeah, we were a bunch of, jerks 200, 300 years ago. He can't say that. He's got to reanalyze history in favor of the Catholic Church and help them understand how beautiful and beneficial the Catholic Church is now. That then helps for the church to propagate itself. People have to believe they are volunteering to get infected with this wonderful thing that's going to make their lives wonderful and that they'll go to heaven. If he told the truth, they would be far less likely to want to bring that concept into their brains and get infected with it, so to speak.
No, and interestingly enough, and going back to the gullibility of these people and the self-replication, I mean, these people really don't see. They really do not see the harmful effects that this is doing.
Well, it's gullibility, but we also acknowledge that religions want to control all information. So if I can control the information that gets into your head, then I can control what you believe. And that's what Pope Benedict, what other religious leaders are always trying to do. That's largely why we saw what we did this week from Pope Francis. You can't criticize religion. Well, you shouldn't criticize religion because every religion wants to have a criticism-free safe zone. And if you can because information is like sunlight on an infection. You get sunlight, it helps kill the bacteria, and you can heal faster. Religions don't want that. You've got to stay in the dark in order to get infected and to remain infected. Education is a big danger to any religion.
Well, and we've seen it, which is why we're seeing, the church actively trying to redefine science standards, for example. They want to see, the population they need the population to be scientifically illiterate. And to some extent, I think it's working in this country, especially. I mean, we're seeing, when you have, silly news articles like the Washington Post saying that 80% of the population wants their food labeled with DNA. I mean, that's a direct example of people not really understanding basic biological principles, and that's scary.
Right. Yep.
And below where you talk about Benedict, you also mentioned almost tongue-in-cheek, gee, were the Jews just waiting for Hitler to come and show them the way? And we talked about this roughly a year and a half ago. John Hagee, the preacher, said that not tongue-in-cheek, not facetiously, about how God used the Holocaust to motivate the Jews to go back to their homeland of Israel. And again, you really, I have a hard time, as somebody who doesn't have any faith, seeing how people can get so far off the mark. And so I really find it really interesting how you and Peter Boghossian, a few people make the point that some of these people genuinely believe the things they say, and it really is like a virus has infected their brain and they're thinking differently and missing things.
Right. That's why I started the book with biological examples of viruses and bacteria and funguses taking over the mental functions of animals. We now know that things like Toxoplasma gondii actually do the same thing to us. We can have our behavior manipulated by a microorganism.
Hey, why don't you go, we're going to do things a little different, but since we're here, why don't you go through, how does Toxoplasma gondii work? Because I think it's easy for some people to say, oh, I can see that in another animal, it's not so threatening, and then maybe you can show how it applies to humans also.
And maybe define what Toxoplasma gondii is.
It's actually an organism that's not too distant from malaria. It's very close to malaria, uses some of the same strategies. It's a parasite, just like malaria is a parasite. We first discovered it in rats and found that it changes the rat's behavior. The rat, once a rat is infected, the Toxoplasma gondii changes the rat's approach to cats. Most rats are afraid of cats. But with the infection, the rat actually becomes attracted to cat pheromones and goes and sniffs around and finds where the cat feces or whatever is there, and then gets eaten by the cat. Well, that's because the Toxoplasma gondii needs to reproduce and can only reproduce in the gut of a cat. Now, that same rat is still afraid of owls or other predators because the organism doesn't reproduce inside of the guts of an owl or other kinds of predators. So it's a clear example of an organism changing the behavior of another organism, a parasite. In order to survive, parasites must manipulate their hosts.
Right.
What we now know is thousands of parasites. There's probably more parasites out there than there are actual non-parasitic species. And what's even more funny is there's parasites that parasitize other parasites who parasitize other species. So you can have a parasite within a parasite even. So they're everywhere, and every one of us has parasites within us in some way, shape, or form.
Right, and I think you can get that across, like in scientific education, non-threateningly. Here are a set of parasites that make their hosts behave in these very counterproductive ways for the host that lead to the host dying.
Right.
And then from there, you explain why don't you go into the whole metaphor of the God virus, and how does it work from there?
Well, the same thing happens in God viruses. The virus gets in your head and makes you do unnatural things. I mean, there's a crab that once infected with this crab parasite, the parasite literally takes away its gonads, its reproductive capacity, and yet the crab still maintains and cares for the eggs of the parasite. So that's pretty destructive if you think about it. Religion does the same thing. It gets inside of you and tells you to do crazy things like abstinence only. Well, that's pretty crazy. Or be a celibate, a Catholic nun or a Catholic priest. That's crazy, because what it does is it says your reproduction is less important than the reproduction of the God virus. We want Catholic nuns, we want Catholic priests out there preaching, because they can reproduce more children that way. If you think, how many kids are going to get born because a priest went out and preached against birth control?
So essentially what you're saying is that, because I've always wondered why such a hang-up on sex with the church. I mean, they really harp on sex. Everything, it's almost like they thrive on controlling sexual behavior.
Yeah, that's why I wrote my most recent book, Sex and God, because I've noticed every religion on the planet is concerned about your sex life. And what it just shows is that sex is a great way to get into your brain. Like any virus or any organism, if it's gonna reproduce inside of you, it has to have a way to penetrate into your brain or into your cells. A cold virus has to have the right keys, almost like a lock and key. They have to have the right keys to get into your cells to cause a cold in your nose or in your sinus cavity. Well, religion is the same thing. If the Jehovah's Witness come and knock on your door, when you open it, what they're really trying to do is sneeze on you. They're trying to give you their God virus, the Jehovah's Witness virus. But most of us laugh in their face or debate them. You know, we can see the stupidity of their religion really quickly. But what happens when a religion comes along that has the keys to you? And that's what it is. You know, that's why you get Catholic families who raise a bunch of kids, and two of them never become Catholics, but they go out and become Pentecostals. Because the Pentecostals had the key that worked in their particular personality. And then, of course, there's some people who are just immune, people who never seem to get colds. Well, there's people who are immune to religion. They raised in a religious home and that just never took with them. Those are the lucky ones, aren't they?
Yeah, and that would describe me, I guess, to a certain extent. I mean, I grew up in Italy, which is very Catholic. My mom's very Catholic. But, you know, I never took it seriously. And then as I got older, I went completely the other way.
But a lot of it, I think it's important to make the point, there are plenty of intelligent people that are religious nonetheless. It's the combination of factors in your genes. And, you know, again, I find the whole metaphor of the virus, like the different ways a virus hides, you know, in a population or an individual. Maybe you can talk about that a little bit. How once you're religious, even if it seems to go away for a long time, something can re-trigger it. How does that work?
Well, yeah, you see that a lot. I noticed it first time many years ago when a 35-year-old friend of mine who was absolutely non-religious went through a year of trauma with his father dying of cancer, and then I go have lunch with him after his father died, and he says, "Do you know Jesus?" I'm thinking, wait a minute, who is this guy? Is this the same guy? And the thought came into my head, who are you and what have you done with my friend? Right. That's how much he had changed. Your entire personality changed. Now, this guy had been non-religious most of his life, but what religion did he get? He got exactly the same religion he was raised in. Until he was about 7 years old, he was raised in this particular religion. That's what he went back to. People almost never wake up and say, Allah is the answer, or Buddha is the answer. No, if they were raised in a Christian culture in, say, a Southern Baptist church, they're very likely to maybe stray away from the church, maybe become non-religious, but if they go back, it's almost always to the church they were raised in. Because the infection is setting much like chickenpox does. Chickenpox, once you get it, it's always in your system. The virus never leaves. So you can get a recurrence of chickenpox in adulthood, and it's called shingles.
Shingles, yeah.
So we know in biology that happens, and we see it in the God virus. People who are not religious at all suddenly get Jesus, and it's almost always as a result of having a serious illness, going through a divorce, having a major trauma in their life, going to prison. Oh, by the way, that's why prisons love, really push religions, and that's why hospitals are almost all religious and always have chaplains, because it's a great place to infect people. Because when you're under stress, your body can get a virus, can get a bacteria, can get an infection. And that infection can also be a religion.
Right, I think it's an important point that religion does do some good things in that sense, that it can help take care of the community, but you can do the exact same thing through humanist values. And so we should not just cede that turf to religion. It's fine to admit, yes, you have a hospital, you're helping people, that's great, but to prey upon people when they're at their really vulnerable point, I think is what you're saying. That's what the God virus is really after.
It's after. It wants you when your resistance is at its lowest, just like any other organism. It can't get into your head. The Jehovah's Witnesses can't get in your head if they don't have the right key. Right. Or if you're not really susceptible at that moment.
I think it's interesting that the point you made, that hospitals are a place where you go to fight things like infection, and then you go to the hospital sometimes and you get infected, I guess.
You could get infected with a bacteria or a God virus at a hospital.
Well, there's nosocomial diseases that happen all the time in hospitals, so I guess this is just another one.
They tend to be really bad, too, and hard to treat.
Unfortunately, this is not something you can cure with a quick hand wash,
So the varicella and shingles is talking about a reservoir within a single person. Can you talk about, as a culture, how does a whole population of maybe moderate religious people, how does that facilitate reemergence of a more dangerous, virulent strain down the line?
Right. Well, religions, if you can have a religion that's not questioned, that there's no stress around it, it tends to atrophy. Just like a person who never gets any exercise tends to get fat and get lazy. Religions do the same thing. That's what you saw in Europe, for example, with all the churches getting automatic taxes. They don't have to go out there and beat the bushes and say, donate to us like U.S. churches do. So you get this weakness, and as the weakness comes on, then other God viruses can start penetrating. Other ideas can start penetrating, and then you get a challenge. And the response is oftentimes what we're seeing today, fundamentalism. Anytime a religion is challenged, there's going to be a certain portion of people that take the religion very seriously and go out and perform the job of the shock troops. And they go out there and battle against the infidels, whether those infidels be Christians, atheists, Muslims, whoever's invading our safe, easygoing space. There's going to be some shock troops. And that's what we're seeing today. You've seen a real rise in fundamentalism in the United States. And it's no mistake that it's exactly parallel with the rise of fundamentalism in Islam. The shock troops of both are feeling threatened. Now I want to submit that it's not Christianity that's threatening Islam, and it's not Islam that's threatening Christianity. It's the internet threatening both.
We've heard talk about with the internet how powerful it is for atheists, because you can connect, see you're not alone, see intelligent ideas all over the world, and it's been a real power. I think that's a great point.
And it's not just atheists connecting to each other. You're finding that kids at home on the internet are finding these atheist blog sites, and they're now starting to get some immunity against the God virus, and I think that's what they're really afraid of. Information.
Well, as you know, I founded Recovering from Religion, and we have a little subset of a private secret group that is just for children of preachers.
Nice.
They can get on this private page and interact with other preachers' kids. Because a preacher's kid sees the BS better than almost anybody.
Right.
They see what their father or mother says from the pulpit, and then they see what they do when they get home. When they get home. So we are really trying to encourage that kind of thing with preachers' kids. But
how popular is it? The site, do you know?
I don't remember the numbers.
Okay.
I really don't. I don't keep track of it. I don't run that part of our. I don't. Sarah Moorhead is our executive director of Recovering from Religion. She takes care of it all.
Okay.
And pretty quickly, I want to, while I'm on the subject, just say we're on the verge of announcing our hotline.
Okay, great, wonderful.
But I can't say it's ready to go yet, but we think it's really soon when somebody could pick up the phone and call and get somebody that will talk to them about their crisis in faith.
That's great. You should get in touch with us once it's up, and we're happy to just let people know through the show.
Excellent. I will. We have training volunteers right now. In fact, if you've got a listener that wants to volunteer, they don't have to have any special qualifications, although you do have to jump through some hoops because, not just anybody can do this. But contact Sarah at recoveringfromreligion.org.
Again, if you give me that information, I'll make sure that we post it so people can follow through on that. And maybe while we're talking about this, can you go back and give us a little of your own religious history and then what led you to found Recovering from Religion Foundation?
Yeah, I was raised in a pretty fundamentalist, I won't say really radical fundamentalist, but pretty strong fundamentalist family. My grandmother thought Jesus wrote the King James Version of the Bible. That should tell you something. She thought Madalyn Murray O'Hair was the devil incarnate.
Yeah.
So I was raised in that kind of environment. My parents were very religious, very devout. I have a lot of respect for them. They're both gone now, but they even became missionaries when they retired. So that's how committed they were to their religious ideas. They hated the fact that I wasn't religious, and none of my brothers are. There's 4 boys in the family. Some going to church 3 to 5 times a week will kill you of being wanting to be in religion. I'll tell you that sooner or later. Yeah. But I was the only religious kid in the family. I was the oldest, goody two shoes kind of guy, And I even got my degree, a master's degree in religion at Scarrett College for Christian Workers, Nashville, Tennessee. So that, I could go on and on. I was a Sunday school teacher. I was a church bus ministry with our church. I did I told you about the gymnasium thing. I taught senior high, taught junior high, Sunday school. I kept teaching Sunday school and even preaching until I was in my mid-30s. Even though I was pretty much an agnostic, I was going to super religious, super liberal church and could get away with a lot more there, of course.
Before you move on, tell us about why you founded the institution. We have caller Carla from Alexandria on the line. Carla, you want to go ahead and do you have a question for Dr. Ray?
Trying to patch her in. Give us a minute.
Hello.
Carla, are you there? All right, we'll tell you what, we're going to keep on going. If we get it back online, we'll do it. So go ahead. So that was your religious upbringing. What prompted you to start the foundation?
Well, after the God virus came out in 2009, it just became a bestseller really quickly. I was shocked at how fast the darn thing sold.
Oh, yeah.
And that was the good side. The downside is I started getting people saying, I need help. Where do I go? Who do I talk to? And you can't really say, well, go have a meeting, go to the meeting with the local atheists or the local skeptics, because that's not what their issue is. Their issue is, how do I deal with my mother who now wants me to go back to church and I want to get out? How do I deal with raising my kids? I raised them Christian and now they're 10 and 12 years old and I'm an atheist now. Those are questions that the local atheist group doesn't want to deal with. The science and skeptics groups, they want to talk about evolution and is DNA something you can pass on to your mother and stuff like that, or get from your mother, rather.
Well, yeah. Well, I know.
Bad joke, okay.
I know for a fact that losing faith is not some trivial thing. It really can cause a lot of emotional and psychological problems for people because, I've known friends personally that have lost their faith, and it was a very rough time in their lives.
And you can lose a lot. You lose your family.
Everything.
Cause divorce. Mormons, really bad for Mormons, really bad for Baptists a lot of times.
I mean,
I founded this. I just said, well, let's start this, see how it works. I announced a meeting here in Kansas City where I live, and 11 people showed up. And 2.5 hours later, the restaurant owner or manager is kicking us out because, I had to reserve the room for an hour.
Oh.
I did not realize how much people needed to talk about this stuff. Yeah. And then, so I had another meeting, and it just grew and grew. And so we split it into 2 meetings, then we split it into 3 meetings. We have 4 recovering from religion meetings right here in Kansas City.
Wow.
We've got well over 100 meetings throughout the world. We even got meetings in London, two in England, several in Australia. We've got them all in Canada. Nate Phelps, Nate Phelps,
yes.
right?
Mm-hmm.
He is on our board of directors. I'm the chairman of the board. But yeah, we got Nate Phelps. Teresa McBain. Mm-hmm. She's on our board of directors as well. So we've got great people helping us, and we're starting these groups all over the country. I went to a meeting today. We have a great meeting here in Kansas City called Oasis. I call it the Rotary Club for Atheists here in Kansas City. And 2 people were there, and they'd shown up because they'd heard of us, and they'd attended our meetings here in Kansas City. And both of them were trying to go through the trauma of leaving religion. So I've got lots of evidence that recovering from religion gives people a safe place to go talk about those issues. Mm-hmm. And then once they've gotten through those issues, then they go to the atheist meeting or the skeptics meeting.
Yeah, exactly.
But what are the benefits? I think we all sort of see there's a lot of difficulty pulling away from religion. What are some of the benefits of living God-free, I think, as you put it?
Yeah. Well, that's the question I ask. When we start a meeting, I say, tell us how you benefited from leaving religion and how religion hurts you when you're in it. And I will get 3 hours. Like I said, 2 or 3 hours later, they'll be still talking about it. Well, the benefits is, you gain a 10% raise in salary instantly. You get to sleep in on Sundays unless you want to go do something else you want to do. You don't have anybody telling you how to raise your children. You can raise them the way you think you should raise them. Yep. I don't know if you saw that study that just came out this week on parents who raise their children with secular values actually have children that are more moral than children raised with religious values. I mean, that's pretty interesting.
Maybe you can talk also on a societal level. What happens when you have a much more secular society? Do we lose all of our morality and we're in trouble? Or what happens if society lives without the God virus?
Well, I've been to Sweden twice, and there's just orgies there all the time. Murders, rapes, it's just a terrible country to visit. I've been to Denmark a couple times, same thing there, northern Germany. I've been to England, all those heathen countries.
Do the statistics bear out your anecdotal report?
Yeah. There's Phil Zuckerman's actually written quite a work, I can't remember the name of it, but where he looked at the secular countries, from Japan to Sweden, Denmark, Norway, and their rate of rape and violence and crime, just crime in general, is very, very low.
Right.
And it seems obvious, but less than 1% of all the people in prisons are atheists. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And my Christian friends get all upset about that. But if you're secular, you see the value of living in peace and harmony within society. If you're religious, that value that is not as obvious.
Right.
Because your religion says, no, your religion is more important than your society.
Right.
That's why we see things like this stupid city council. They're saying God is more important than secular governing values. Mm-hmm. So you are a second-class citizen in this community because you don't believe in God, or you don't believe in the right God. That kind of thing.
I was told one time that I shouldn't have free speech because I'm in the minority as an atheist. I was told this by a Christian. I said, "You're serious about this?" He said, "Yes." He really felt that I shouldn't be able to express my speech.
Well, and the first President Bush, the smart one, didn't think atheists should be citizens. He wasn't sure if we should be.
Yeah, aren't sure if we should be, right.
All right, so we're working to get a question come across. We'll give one more second. Meanwhile, can you tell us about the Sexuality podcast? You know, we talked about your book a little bit.
Right. Yeah, when I came out with Sex and God, I got, obviously a lot of things came back at me then, and I realized there's really a lot of misinformation out there about sex and sexuality among atheists, among we secularists. So I'm going to try to do some education here. Dave Smalley helped me at Dogma Debate, and we started it back in August, and we're working on episode number 21 right now. I'm just blown away. I've set it up so that I interview people every other week, and then I do kind of a information thing every on the off weeks. And it's fun. I'm getting to I'm a clinical psychologist by training, so I love to use those skills to just interview people. And I sat down and like last week, we had a couple ex-Mormons, and I'm interviewing them. They're married to each other. They were both Mormons at one time. And I'm just asking them questions, you know, like, how much do you use pornography? How much do you masturbate? When did you start masturbating? You know, those are questions that nobody asks people on a show.
Right.
And there's a lot of guilt and shame around all that.
Yep.
And I just find it's cool to get people to talk out loud. And these are two spouses. They're married to each other. There's no need to have secrets.
Exactly.
And they are learning, and you can hear right in their voice. Your listeners should go look at episode 12 when I interviewed two ex-Muslim women who were born and raised right here in the United States and had to leave their families, change their names, hide from their families, because they basically have a death sentence on them. And they were born and raised right here in the United States. It's a heart-rending interview, but very uplifting too. These are two really, really brave women to have done what they did.
That's good. Yeah, and we'll get a link to that. Larry, you want to do the question?
So yeah, Carla, I guess we were trying to get her on the phone, but she cannot, for some reason we can't patch her through. But she wanted you to know, Darrel, that let's see what it says, that men may be the leaders, but women spread the God virus and get tortured. So I guess what she's trying to say is that there is, you know, some patriarchal, I guess, idea to, and kind of a misogynistic view of misogyny in religion, I suppose.
Well, if she reads my book, Sex and God, she'll find out I agree with her 172%.
Right.
If you look at any church, who's in attendance? It's females. There's a lot more women in church than there are men. And they're propagating the God virus largely because the patriarchy has put a guilt trip on them, saying, well, if your children turn out bad, it's because you didn't follow the God virus properly. Right. So women get a double whammy of guilt. I have an article that just came out last month called Male Shame, The Roots of Female Shame, ? It was published in the American Atheist magazine, but he put it up on his site. So it's free, it's available, anybody can read it. I would encourage your listener, the questioner, to go read that. Because in that article, I try to show how the patriarchy has imposed such onerous stuff on women, and then we turn around and blame women when it doesn't.
Exactly.
So no, I fully agree with her. She's right on target. Yeah.
You mentioned guilt and shame a little bit. You have a great diagram in your book. Can you explain a little bit how the church or the God virus uses guilt and then offers a temporary cure for it? Explain that whole cycle.
Yeah, well, it's basically the church gives you the disease and says they'll help you cure the disease too. There's things that the church has found that can make you feel guilty about. And the main thing is food and sex. Those are the two things. And you're going to eat and you're going to have sex. So if the church says you can't eat certain foods, or the religion does, and you can't have certain kinds of sex, as a human being, you're probably going to do those things. And then when you do, there's only one place to get rid of it, and that's to come back to the church. Now, there's two things about that. One is called guilt, and one is called shame. Guilt is what the Protestants use the most. They try to guilt you into behavior. And largely that's because the Protestant religion is too diffuse. There's not a central control, and the community itself is not all Protestant.
Right.
But if you've got an organization, if you've got a community that is all the same as Catholicism was in many countries, as Islam is in many countries, then it switches to shame. There's really you can think of guilt and shame as a continuum with guilt on one side and shame on the other, and they do overlap. But a shame-based culture means that women, especially women, bear the price of the shame. And you are responsible for raising their children and making them godly and Allah-like or Muhammad-like or whatever. And if you don't, you're the one to blame. And it's the shaming of the female that's so important in shame-based cultures.
Wow.
That's why you get honor killings and things like that. That's why this interview was so important that I mentioned earlier about the 2 ex-Muslim women.
We're running out of time. I want to make sure we get a couple other points in. One is you talk in your book about how religions they explore all the different routes that they can get to sink their hooks into society.
Right.
So you can see a really vigorous, assaultive, parasitic one that's hurting people versus a more symbiotic approach. I'm working on an app that Peter Boghossian has a lot of people helping with this. And he made a conscious decision not to put a real special focus on Islam just because he was worried that he didn't have the right to put all of us that are helping at risk. And then, with Charlie Hebdo, it really brought that home. But can you explain some of the major religions and the different states of Christianity and Islam right now and how they're trying to take hold of societies?
Well, yeah, it's control of information. If I can kill those people who are challenging the religion, then I lop off an entire area of information that's available to the populace. The religions, especially cults, have to control information, and Islam is a cult. Some parts of Catholicism are cults for sure. Some parts of Baptist church are cults. Mormons are clearly a cult. But you look at a cult. There's 2 key things I use to define a cult. One is, do they try to control information excessively? All do, but do they try it excessively? And 2, do they have excessive restrictions on sex and sexuality? Put those 2 together, you can really spot cults all over the place.
Yeah.
Well, what we've got in the United States and in other parts of Northern Europe and such is that the information age has really challenged the religion so much that it's taken the wind out of it. I mean, we see evangelical churches now dying all over the place. One of the biggest ones we have in Kansas City now went bankrupt, and now the school district owns the building. So that's good, but it's the fact that the sunshine is now shining into these places. It's hard to maintain these belief systems if there's alternative information out there. So I don't know if that's the question you're asking, Rob.
Well, we've got about 40 seconds, so I'm going to take that as the answer. The last thing, if you can touch on, is you have psychologist as training, and you started the Secular Therapy Project. In 20 seconds, tell us why.
If somebody needs a therapist and they want to make sure that therapist doesn't send them back to Jesus or church, go to seculartherapy.org and search. We guarantee these folks are well trained and they won't send you back to church. It's hard to find a good secular therapist in most communities. There's a family therapist that was trained by a religious school, or there's God-trained therapists all over the place. Be very careful. We've even got guidelines.
Well, we gotta cut it right there. We want to thank you for joining us, Darrel, and we want to thank our audience for watching. And catch us next time.
Thanks, guys.
Yep.
Thank you. Bye.